How Matt Confronted His Brother's Deception After 20 Years. Reddit Family Drama Story. In this Reddit family drama story, we're about to dive deep into a family conflict that turns everything upside down. Secrets, betrayals, and a shocking revelation at a family dinner will leave you questioning everything. If you enjoy stories like this, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel, Silent Wars, for more gripping tales and emotional roller coasters. It was just another Sunday, the kind of day when family dinners were supposed to bring everyone together, a tradition that had always felt comforting despite its predictable routine. My father and stepmother, Janet, had planned a quiet Easter meal, a familiar gathering where the aroma of pot roast and roasted carrots usually filled the air, creating a sense of warmth and comfort. But today was different. As I entered their home, I felt an unfamiliar wave of discomfort settle in my stomach. Perhaps it was the growing tension I'd been feeling for years, or maybe it was the fact that today felt like a trap, ready to spring. My brother Ethan, as usual, was running late. He always had an air of being too busy for the family, too important to be bothered with punctuality. His lateness wasn't an anomaly, it was part of who he was, an attitude that seemed to permeate everything about him. It wasn't the first time, nor would it be the last time he made an entrance with his typical swagger. But this time, something in the air was different. As I hung my coat, I could feel a tightness in my chest, as if the walls themselves were closing in on me. The dinner table was already set, with Janet presiding over the meal with the poise and perfection that she always did. My father, seated at the head of the table, was already pouring a second glass of bourbon before I had even taken my seat. The scent of the food, which normally brought me some sense of solace, now only seemed to amplify the tension in the room. It felt like everything was in its place, except for me. I could feel the familiar discomfort of being the outsider, the one who had never quite fit in, no matter how many times I showed up or tried to prove my worth. My wife, Emma, who had been by my side for years, shot me a knowing glance across the table. It was the kind of look that said, "Just get through this, and we can leave after pie." A small, silent plea for us to make it through the evening without confrontation. Little did we know that this seemingly simple dinner, a meal that should have been a celebration, would unravel everything. Ethan arrived late, just as I expected. His hair was slicked back, trying to maintain the appearance of youth even as he edged closer to middle age. He was dressed like he was attending a business meeting instead of a family dinner. He swaggered in, greeting everyone with an overly enthusiastic kiss for Janet, a slap on the back for my dad, and an obnoxious wink for Emma that made my stomach churn. He was the star of the show, and everyone else was just playing their parts. We all sat down to eat, but the conversation was as shallow as it always was. Janet asked about Emma's work, Dad complained about gas prices, and Ethan, predictably, talked about himself. "I've been working on some real estate projects in Austin and Denver," he said, dropping buzzwords like NFT and blockchain that he didn't truly understand, but which he thought sounded impressive. The conversation was so contrived, so rehearsed. I felt trapped in it, suffocating under the weight of my own silence. As dinner went on, the air in the room grew heavier. I could feel my anxiety rising with every word, every glance Ethan shot my way. I tried to hold on, thinking that once dessert came, everything would settle. But that wasn't the case. Instead, what followed would be a slow-motion car crash, something I couldn't look away from, no matter how much I wanted to. Ethan dropped the first bombshell, asking me for $10,000, just like that. No apology, no explanation, just the expectation that I would give him the money. It was casual, it was sudden, and it shattered everything in an instant. Ethan walked in with his usual swagger, a confident smile plastered across his face, as if he were the star of some movie, with the rest of us merely extras in his world. He greeted Janet with a kiss on the cheek, slapping Dad on the back as though they were old buddies at a bar instead of father and son. And then, of course, he flashed that trademark wink at Emma, one that made my skin crawl every time. It was the same old routine, but tonight, something felt different. I watched as Ethan made his way to the table, the same sense of entitlement radiating from him. It was as if he believed the world revolved around him, that his mere presence was enough to make everything okay. We all sat down to eat, the familiar scent of pot roast and roasted vegetables filling the air. The conversation started just as it always did. Small talk, surface-level chatter designed to avoid anything real, anything that might lead to uncomfortable truths. My dad, as always, complained about the rising gas prices. Janet casually mentioned something about her latest Pinterest project, and Emma tried to keep the peace with her usual warm smile. But I could feel the quiet tension beneath the surface. I was silently seething, wondering when it would be my turn to speak up, to be seen for who I was and what I had done, but instead I was stuck in this never-ending cycle of pretending. When will they finally see me? I asked myself. When will they realize that I mattered just as much as Ethan? It was a question that had lingered in my mind for years, but tonight it was harder to ignore than ever. Ethan, of course, didn't feel the weight of this tension. Instead, he jumped into his usual self-congratulatory monologue. "So, I've been working on a few new business ventures," he said, leaning back in his chair with that same smug look on his face. He casually dropped real estate buzzwords and NFT talk, words that meant nothing to anyone who wasn't still stuck in the past. I could tell by the blank expressions around the table that no one was really listening. Janet nodded absently, her eyes glazing over as she looked down at her plate. Dad grunted in response, clearly uninterested. And Emma, ever the peacemaker, smiled and chimed in with a half-hearted compliment. It was all so predictable, so exhausting. My heart pounded in my chest as I thought about the sacrifices I had made for this family, the years of hard work, the late nights, the decisions I had carefully crafted to help them. Yet here we were again, with Ethan dominating the conversation, talking about his so-called success, while I was left to stew quietly, feeling invisible. It wasn't just the fact that he had always been the golden child. It was the fact that he never had to try, never had to prove anything, while I had to work harder than anyone to even earn a seat at this table. When will they see me for who I am? I asked again, but this time the question felt heavier, more bitter. Ethan continued to ramble on about his latest projects, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside of me. My mind raced, but my voice remained silent. How many times had I bitten my tongue? How many more family dinners would I sit through, watching Ethan take the spotlight while I remained a shadow? It felt like I was suffocating in this perfect little family fantasy, desperate for someone to recognize the effort, the pain, the truth I had carried for so long. The atmosphere in the room shifted in an instant. The calm, familiar din of our family dinner was suddenly shattered when Ethan sat back in his chair, wiped his lips with his napkin, and leaned forward. His casual demeanor did nothing to prepare me for what came next. With the same level of ease he would ask for a glass of water, he casually dropped a bombshell. "Hey, Matt," he began, his voice oozing that same tone I knew all too well, an odd mixture of faux humility and undeniable expectation. It was a tone that suggested a sense of entitlement, as if he already knew how the conversation was going to end, like it was a script he'd rehearsed in his head 100 times. "I need $10,000, he said, as bluntly as if asking for pocket change. No hesitation, no second thoughts, Just a cold, direct request, as if the money was already his, owed to him by some unspoken family bond that I had clearly missed. My stomach dropped. The shock of his words hit me like a ton of bricks, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I glanced at Emma, who had frozen mid-bite, her fork suspended in midair. Her eyes met mine, wide with disbelief, silently asking if she'd heard him correctly. The room was now silent, as if the weight of Ethan's words had sucked all the air out of it. I could feel the tension settling around us like a thick fog, suffocating every one of us. It wasn't just the audacity of the request. It was the fact that Ethan thought he could ask for that kind of money with absolutely no shame, no explanation, as if it were his right to have it. I slowly set my fork down on the edge of my plate, the clink of it against the ceramic the only sound that broke the silence. I could feel the eyes of everyone on me now, my father, who had barely looked up from his food, my stepmother Janet, who was suddenly very still, and Emma, who seemed to be waiting for me to react. But what was I supposed to say? No, I said, my voice calm, controlled. It wasn't a difficult decision. Ethan's request, as outrageous as it was, hadn't even left me second-guessing. I wasn't about to be manipulated into giving him anything, especially not after all the years of sacrifices I had made, all the effort I had put into supporting this family, only to be treated like an afterthought. Ethan blinked, caught off guard by my response, but quickly tried to brush it off with a half-laugh, as if the entire exchange had been some kind of joke. "Come on, Matt," he said, a hint of impatience creeping into his voice. "It's just 10 grand, it's not that big of a deal." But it was a big deal. It wasn't about the money. It was about the years of feeling invisible, of being used, of never once being acknowledged for everything I had done for this family. As Ethan sat there, trying to brush off my refusal, I knew in that moment that things had changed. I wasn't going to keep pretending anymore. I wasn't going to let him walk all over me and take me for granted like he always had. This was the moment where I finally put my foot down, and I was done letting him think I owed him anything. Ethan blinked, visibly stunned by my refusal. For a moment I thought he might back down, but instead, he laughed it off, trying to shrug off the awkwardness of the situation. But there was something in the way his voice grew louder, more insistent, that told me this wasn't over. "You owe me, man, you owe me," he said again, his fist slamming onto the table with a force that made the dishes rattle. His tone was harsh, almost demanding. He wasn't just asking for money anymore. He was trying to make me feel like I had no choice, like I was somehow obligated to give him what he wanted. I felt the tension in my chest build, like a balloon slowly inflating, about to burst. It was clear that Ethan wasn't going to let it go. He was pushing me to remember something I had spent years burying deep inside. The memories, the resentment, the anger, I could feel it all coming to the surface. And then it happened. With a casualness that made my skin crawl, Ethan threw the truth into the air like it was no big deal, as if the weight of what he was revealing didn't matter to him at all. "You remember that night, Matt?" he asked, his voice dripping with arrogance. "The one in college? I saved your ass. You'd be in prison if it weren't for me." My heart stopped. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Everything I had tried to forget, everything I had hidden from myself, came flooding back in an instant. That night. The one night that had shaped so much of my life, the night I had tried so desperately to forget. The night Ethan had covered for me. The night he had stepped in and saved me from a mess I had created, but in doing so, had also sealed my fate. I stared at him, my mind racing. How could he say that so casually? How could he throw our past in my face like it was nothing? The truth was out in the open now, raw and undeniable. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my body tensing as the reality of the situation sank in. Everyone was watching. The silence that followed felt deafening. Janet turned pale, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. Dad, usually so calm, had clenched his fist so tightly that his knuckles turned white. I could see the confusion and tension on his face as he tried to process what was happening, but it was Emma who spoke volumes in that moment. Under the table, she gently squeezed my leg, a subtle, reassuring gesture that said everything I needed to hear. "It's time," her touch seemed to whisper, and I knew she was right. This wasn't just about money anymore. It wasn't even about the fact that Ethan was trying to manipulate me into giving him what he wanted. This was about the years of silence, of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. This was about me finally standing up, about confronting the past and the truth Ethan had buried along with me. I wasn't going to let him control this moment. I wasn't going to let him manipulate me. Not anymore. As I looked around the table at my family, at Ethan, at Janet, at Dad, I felt a surge of clarity. This was it. The truth had come out, and it was time to face it. For 20 long years, I had carried the guilt. I had lived with the burden of a lie that Ethan had crafted, a lie that had trapped me in a prison of my own making. Every year, every birthday, every holiday, I had played my part, pretending like everything was fine, pretending like I was part of this family. But it wasn't true. The guilt I had carried weighed heavier with each passing day. I had never forgotten that night. The night Ethan had framed me for something I didn't do. I had buried the truth so deep inside, I had convinced myself it was easier to forget, to move on, to let it go. But tonight, sitting at that table, watching him lie, it all came crashing down. Enough was enough. I had spent so long being the good son, the good brother, the one who took care of things, the one who always did the right thing. I had always hoped that someday, somehow, they would see me for who I truly was, for the sacrifices I had made, for the things I had done for them. But that hope had evaporated. It was time to stop pretending. It was time to stop carrying Ethan's secret, his lie. I stood up. My voice was steady but loud, my words cutting through the suffocating silence that had fallen over the room. "Let's talk about what you really covered, Ethan," I said, my voice ringing in the air. It wasn't just a question, it was a declaration. The truth was no longer something I could hide. I had been hiding it for far too long, and now it was time to expose the lies that had been festering in the dark corners of our family. Ethan froze. His confident grin, the one he always wore like a mask, disappeared. His face turned ghostly white, and for the first time I saw him stumble. His eyes darted from me to Janet, to Dad, and then back to me. He couldn't find his words. The calm, controlled exterior he had spent years building around himself started to crack, piece by piece. And in that moment, I knew this was it. The moment I had been waiting for. The truth had come crashing down, and there was no going back. "You remember that night, Ethan?" I continued, every word heavy with the weight of years of silence. "The one in college? The one where you saved my ass? You think I've forgotten? You think I've let go of that? I haven't. I've carried it for 20 years, but not anymore." The room was dead silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, but I didn't care. I didn't care about the shock on their faces or the uncomfortable tension that hung in the air. I didn't care about the guilt that had kept me silent for all these years. What mattered now was the truth. And for the first time in 2 decades, I was finally speaking it aloud. Ethan's face twisted in disbelief. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, unable to form a response. I could see the gears turning in his head, the panic setting in as he realized that the lie he had been writing for so long was crumbling in front of him. The mask he had carefully constructed, the perfect image he had tried to maintain, was falling apart. For the first time in 20 years, I wasn't the one who was guilty. The guilt was his. The responsibility was his. And I was done carrying it. It was the end of my senior year in college, the kind of time when everyone should be celebrating their achievements, thinking about graduation and the future. But for me, it wasn't a time of excitement. It was a time of pain, of loneliness, and a deep, gnawing emptiness that seemed to overshadow everything else. My girlfriend had just dumped me in the most heartless way, a text message that left me questioning everything about myself, about my worth. I wasn't ready for it. I wasn't prepared for that kind of rejection. So, as I often did when faced with emotional pain, I turned to something that would numb me, something that would make the world fade away, even if it was just for a few hours. I went to a party. It was supposed to be an escape, a way to forget. But the more I drank, the more I sank into that dark place, into the pain of the breakup, and into the guilt I had started to carry ever since things fell apart. It was a blur. I remember faces, laughter, and the buzz of conversation around me. But everything started to spiral, and I couldn't keep track of where it was going. The alcohol drowned my thoughts, and soon, everything became fuzzy. The next morning, I woke up with a searing headache and a sense of disorientation. The kind of disorientation you get when you've done something you can't remember, but you know deep down that it wasn't good. My hands were sticky. Blood. There was blood on my hands. Panic surged through me, but I had no idea what had happened the night before. I was disoriented, confused, and scared. I had no memory of what I'd done, but I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me. And then Ethan showed up, like a knight in shining armor. He was there, acting like everything was fine, like I hadn't just woken up to the worst kind of nightmare. He told me not to confess, that he would handle everything. "Don't worry about it," he said, as if the consequences didn't matter. "I've got this, Matt. I'll take care of it." At the time, I trusted him. He was my brother, after all. He was supposed to have my back, to help me when I was at my lowest. So, I believed him. And the charges were dropped. The complaint was withdrawn, and I was saved. Or so I thought. At the time, I thought I had dodged a bullet, that Ethan had done me a favor by covering up whatever had happened. But now, I see the truth. I wasn't saved. I was used. Ethan had manipulated me, made me believe that he was protecting me when, in reality, he was protecting himself. He had set me up, framed me for something I didn't do, and used my guilt and shame as a shield for his own actions. All those years I carried the weight of that night, thinking it was my fault. But it wasn't. It was never my fault. It was Ethan's. The burden, that heavy weight I had carried for so long, had never been mine to bear. It had always been his. He had used me, discarded me, and made me believe that I owed him something. And for 20 years, I had lived with that lie, paying the price for something I didn't do, something that was never mine to carry. But now, I know. I know the truth. And that truth is more powerful than any guilt or shame I've ever felt. Ethan may have thought he got away with it, but the truth is, catching up with him now. It's time for me to let go of the past, to finally free myself from the lie he forced upon me. Ethan tried to backpedal, like he always did. He attempted to smooth things over with a half-hearted laugh, offering more lies in an effort to keep the facade intact. But it was too late. The truth had been laid bare, and there was no taking it back. The air in the room grew heavy, suffocating, as the reality of what had just been revealed hung over us. Ethan's usual charm, that swagger he carried so effortlessly, had vanished. He was no longer the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. His mask had cracked, And what lay underneath was something far darker than any of us had ever imagined. My parents, who had always turned a blind eye to Ethan's actions, were finally forced to confront the truth. Janet, usually so composed and diplomatic, was eerily silent, her eyes glued to the table, unwilling to meet anyone's gaze. She didn't speak, didn't even try to defend Ethan. She knew. She had always known something was off, but it wasn't until that moment that she had to face the ugly reality. Dad, on the other hand, was a different story. His face turned pale, his hands trembling slightly as he stared at Ethan, disbelief and guilt swirling in his eyes. For the first time in my life, I saw him shaken. "We protected the wrong son," he muttered under his breath, his voice barely a whisper. It was a simple statement, but it hit me like a freight train. It was the truth, and it was the most painful thing I had ever heard. I had always wanted to be a part of this family, to feel like I belonged. But in that moment, I realized something that had been eating at me for years. The family I had longed for, the family I had fought so hard to be accepted into, had never truly existed. It was a fantasy, a lie. I had spent decades trying to earn their approval, believing that if I just worked hard enough, did enough for them, they would see me as their son, as their equal. But in the end, it was never about me. It was always about Ethan, always about keeping up the illusion of the perfect family, no matter the cost. The dinner, which had started off as just another family gathering, quickly descended into an emotional battleground. There were no more polite smiles, no more forced laughter. It was raw, unfiltered emotion spilling out, and everyone felt it. Ethan, unable to take the heat, stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. I watched him go, my heart pounding, my chest tight with a mixture of anger and relief. Ethan was gone, but the damage had been done. The lies, the manipulation, the years of pretending everything was fine, it was all out in the open now, and there was no going back. I finally felt free. Free from the weight of the guilt that had been thrust upon me. Free from the shame that had followed me around like a shadow for 20 years. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was carrying someone else's burden. The burden of being the family's scapegoat. The one who was always blamed, always overlooked, always forgotten. But as much as I felt liberated, there was no victory in it. No sense of triumph. Just a hollow, aching emptiness that echoed louder than any victory could. The reality was this: the family I had longed for had never truly existed. And as much as I had tried to fit into that mold, the truth was, I never belonged there. In the days that followed, I made the decision that, in hindsight, I should have made years ago. I took back what was mine, not just the material possessions that had been taken for granted, but something much more important: my dignity, my life, and my freedom. It wasn't just about the electronics, the things I had bought for the house over the years. It was about reclaiming my sense of self-worth, something I had sacrificed for too long in an effort to please people who never truly appreciated me. The first thing I did was disconnect the Wi-Fi. I had set up the entire system, paid for the router, the mesh network, and all the tech support that kept their online lives running smoothly. They had no idea how much time and energy I had put into making sure everything was seamless for them. And yet, they had treated me like I was invisible. It wasn't just about the money I had spent. It was about the hours I had invested, the care I had taken to help them, to make their lives easier while my own needs went unmet. I wasn't going to allow that anymore. They could figure it out on their own now. It felt liberating, like I was cutting an invisible cord that had tethered me to a life of being the family's unseen servant. Next, I took back the smart TV. It had been a gift I'd given to the family, one I thought would bring everyone together. I imagined the joy they'd have watching movies, sports, and family gatherings. Instead, it had become a symbol of everything that was wrong with our family dynamic. Every time I looked at it, I was reminded of the emptiness I felt in that house. My efforts to create connections were met with indifference and disrespect. So I took it down, packed it into my car, and drove off. It wasn't just the TV, it was the years I had spent trying to fit into a family that didn't want me, trying to be the person they needed while suppressing my own identity. Then I began to remove all the other electronics I had purchased over the years. The security cameras, the backup generator, the home theater system, all of it. I had given so much to this family, but it was never enough. They had always taken what I offered, never acknowledging it, never truly valuing it. And so, I decided to take it all back. One by one, I disconnected the systems I had installed, unplugged the devices that I had paid for, and removed the things I had worked so hard to bring into that house. With each item I took, I felt lighter, freer. It was a reclaiming of power, of autonomy. These material things weren't just objects, they were my sacrifices, my contributions to a family that had taken everything without ever giving anything in return. But it wasn't just about the possessions. The deeper act of taking back what was mine was about reclaiming my life, my freedom. I had been living for others for far too long, sacrificing my own happiness and well-being to meet their expectations. I had let myself be manipulated, ignored, and dismissed. No more. This wasn't just a physical act of removing items from the house. It was an emotional and psychological separation. It was the moment I stopped pretending that I belonged to a family that never truly accepted me. It was the moment I realized that the only person I needed to please was myself. As I loaded the last of the items into my car, I felt a sense of finality. The ties that had bound me to that house, to that false sense of belonging, were finally severed. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't without guilt. But deep down, I knew it was the right thing to do. I wasn't going to keep sacrificing my own happiness for the sake of people who would never appreciate me. I had taken back my freedom, and with it, I was ready to move forward, to build a life that was truly mine, free from the shadows of the past. As I drove away from the house, the weight that had been pressing down on me for years began to lift. It wasn't immediate, but it was a distinct feeling, a sense of freedom, a sense of relief that I hadn't experienced in a long time. The act of taking back what was mine, both physically and emotionally, had set something in motion inside me that couldn't be undone. The long road ahead felt different. The streets were the same. But I was no longer the same person who had entered that house just a few hours ago. I had been living for them for so long, striving to fit in, to be seen, to be valued. But now, I was living for myself. The $10,000 Ethan had asked for that night at dinner? In the grand scheme of things, it didn't matter. At the time, his request had felt like a punch to the gut. It was the audacity of it. The expectation that I would just hand over such a large sum without a second thought, as if I owed him something. But as I drove away from the house, the check he had later sent me wasn't what haunted me. It wasn't about the money, it was never about the money. That $700 check, which he had sent with such detachment, was just another transaction. It was a reminder that, to them, my value had always been measured in dollars. To them, I had been nothing more than a resource. I wasn't a person, they never saw me that way. I had been the one who paid for everything, the electronics, the dinners, the holiday decorations, the bills. But it had never been about appreciation or love. It was about what I could offer. And in that moment, as I watched the city lights fade in my rearview mirror, I understood something crucial. I didn't need their validation anymore. I didn't need their approval, their acknowledgement, or their false sense of gratitude. All those years of bending over backward, trying to prove my worth to them, trying to be the family member they could rely on, the one who always showed up, none of that had made me feel valued. I had spent so much of my life believing that if I just gave more, did more, they would see me for who I was. But I was wrong. They never saw me. They never truly saw me as anything other than what I could give them. I had been enough all along, but it took me this long to realize it. The real lesson, though, was not in the money or the family dynamics. It wasn't even in the petty revenge of taking back the things I had bought over the years. No, the lesson was that I had been enough for so long, and I had just never acknowledged it. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their constant validation to feel worthy. All I needed was to realize that I was valuable, not because of what I could provide, but simply because I was me. I had been enough, and that was the most freeing realization I could have had. As I continued to drive, I could feel the air in the car shift. It wasn't heavy with guilt or resentment anymore. It was light. It was a freedom I hadn't tasted in years. The future was wide open now, and I didn't need anyone else's permission to take it. I was finally living for me, and that was worth more than any amount of money, more than any family gathering, and more than any attempt to be seen by people who never truly understood me. I had taken control of my life, and that was a power no one could take away from me. A few weeks after everything had settled, I received a voicemail from my sister, Emily. I hadn't heard from her since the family dinner, and when I saw her name pop up on my phone, my heart skipped a beat. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep the walls I'd built around myself intact. But another part, the part that longed for a connection that had always seemed just out of reach, urged me to listen. I pressed play, and her voice crackled through the speaker. "Hey, it's me, Emily," she said, her tone soft, almost apologetic. I want to apologize. I should have stood up for you all these years. I was scared, and I just kept quiet because I didn't want to rock the boat. But I see things differently now, and I realize I should have been on your side. I'm sorry, Matt. I was wrong. The words hit me harder than I expected. For so many years, I had felt like the outsider, the one who was always invisible, always the one who had to earn my place. To hear Emily, my sister, say those words was both a relief and a revelation. She had been afraid, just like I had, but unlike me, she had never found the courage to speak up. She had remained silent, not because she didn't care, but because she was scared to be different. Scared to face the consequences of challenging the family dynamic that had always been so toxic. But now, she understood. She understood the pain I had carried for years. She understood the weight of being pushed aside, the emotional exhaustion of constantly trying to fit into a family that didn't seem to care. And for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. I felt heard. Emily wasn't asking for forgiveness, but simply offering her apology, acknowledging the hurt she had unknowingly caused by remaining silent. And in that moment, it was enough. It was enough because, in those simple words, I realized that there was still someone in my family who cared, who was willing to rebuild what had been broken for so long. I had felt so alone for so many years, but now Emily was reaching out, offering her hand, ready to reconnect. And that was something I never thought would happen. Of course, it didn't change the fact that Ethan and Janet and even my father hadn't changed. The coldness between us was still there. The lies, the manipulation, and the silence that had permeated our family for years would not disappear overnight. But I had changed. I had found my voice. I had stood up for myself in a way I never thought possible. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need to ask for permission to be heard. As I listened to Emily's message, I felt a weight lifting off my chest. It wasn't a magical fix to everything that had been broken in our family, but it was a start. It was the first step toward rebuilding something that felt real, something that didn't require me to sacrifice my dignity or my self-worth to fit in. Emily's apology wasn't the resolution to all my problems, but it was a step toward healing, and for that, I was grateful. I didn't need to have everything figured out. All I needed was this someone who cared enough to apologize and make the effort to rebuild what we had lost. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel so alone anymore. Thank you for watching this Reddit family drama story. We hope you found it as gripping as we did. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to Silent Wars for more exciting stories. Your support helps us continue creating content that you'll love.